Good afternoon. It is 2 p.m. Saturday, July the 11th in the Midwest. You're listening to Altitude Adjustment, the podcast talk up about people, politics, and professions. I'm Leon Davis, and joining me today is my guest hosts, Leonard Davis and Warren Harper Jr. We're going to talk a lot about monuments. Today's show is going to give us an opportunity to explore some of the current events surrounding monuments, and we look forward to having you join us. Welcome to Altitude Adjustment. Welcome to Altitude. All right, so we're having audio issues. So welcome to the show, gentlemen.
How you doing, Leon
All
and
right.
Warren?
Hey guys.
So did you guys hear that? Did it do the welcome to altitude adjustment thing?
No.
No, it didn't play the music and your voiceover.
Ah,
I
It
okay.
heard
didn't do that.
Well, anyway, because I love that little thing. I did it. I worked on it, and it's supposed to do that. But occasionally, because I have so many things going on in my scene construction, and
Uh-huh.
Warren knows because he's worked with me on several occasions about composing scenes rather. That because sometimes things don't go off without a hitch. But we're into the show now, and I want to welcome you, gentlemen. So what I'm going to do is first we're going to just have a little discussion with us, and then we'll open it up so that people can join us if they want to. You can always help participate in the podcast by going to okay. So Steve Kassane says he heard it. Well, great. we did
Okay.
we didn't get to
Amen.
hear it.
we
Welcome,
didn't.
Steve. Thanks for joining us. But so what we're going to do is you can always go to the podcast to the the YouTube channel and type in your questions. But in a little bit, we'll open it up so that you can actually uh, use the link to join the podcast visually or auditorily. You know, some people don't want to be seen, but they want to be able to talk and not have to type everything out. And then I'll give you the link for that coming up in just a few moments. But first, we're going to get started. And um, so the last week, I had made mention. I think it was last week, right? That we talked about
Yeah.
uh, removing names off of monuments and stuff like that. And so this week, we thought it would be a good idea to talk about the monument discussion overall. And so one of the things and this because this is such a unique topic, because it's such a unique event, you know, we've never had such a large scale um, impact on society in such a short period of time. So there's a lot of discussions going on around monuments. And one of the discussions that I had, and maybe this isn't the best place to start, but I thought it was an interesting place to start, was someone said, so we have all of the um, monuments from the Confederacy. And so some people were like, well, why don't we replace these monuments with monuments of black uh, black celebrities. I don't want to say celebrities. I want to replace it with
Black historical figures.
black historical figures. Thank you very much. And so when I first heard that, I kind of recoiled. I didn't. I can see where that has some value, but I thought in the it that it would be too early in the discussion. You don't just tear one down and throw one up you know, without having some kind of discussion about that, so that people understand what change is going on. So you have to do some, you have to do some change management. What do you guys think of, replacing some of the Confederate or replacing the Confederate statues? I'm interested, difficult, having difficulty with the word some and all, but what do you think of replacing those statues with Black historical figures?
I think it's an excellent idea, in light of the fact that most of those Confederate statues are of slave owners, Confederate traders who rose up, fought against our country to keep the institution of slavery alive. So I think that's a great idea. Question is, how do we go about doing it? How do we deal with the resistance to it? Those are the questions that you sit down and have a conversation about. But in this era right now of protest and almost say revolution, people are just acting. They're getting out there and they're doing their thing. So that's where we are right now. We are not having discussions about it. We're just doing it. Certain people are doing it.
So what?
Well, you got that right, that certain people are doing it and just acting, but you're seeing frustration and anger boil over.
Mhm.
And, just what's brought this up is with all of the brutality and the racism and everything, they're going after everything. So now we're going after statue.
So what do you think? What
Um,
What do you think of the idea of replacing Confederate statues with Black historical
I
figures?
think, I think if we leave them up, we also put more statues of black historical figures, and we use these things to learn. We teach the 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 statues of the Confederate historical figures what they did, why they were given that statue in the first place. And I would say even next to them in most of the places, you put up a black historical statue from that area. So you get both viewpoints. Or
Hmm.
if it's in the Southwest, you put up a Hispanic statue. Because that part of the country was taken from Mexico. And there's Mexican people that have been there longer than any European we've had in this country. And I think we use it as a tool to learn rather than a symbol for hatred. Uh, that's my bottom line
So
view of it.
so here's so
That's my bottom line view.
so you and Warren both brought up an issue that I think has to be addressed at some point, and hopefully sooner rather than later, and that's the pushback of so there's this discussion around the statue removal is about removing heritage or changing history, and there is that also the aspect of it that it is those statues in their places right now are causing pain to a lot of communities around the country. And so my thought is that even before we start tearing down all of the statues, but unfortunately that has already started in some places, but before tearing down the
Hmm.
statues and deciding what to do with them and deciding what to put in its place is having a broader discussion about and I know this goes it's taking the discussion back
Hmm.
beyond. It's having the discussion about, do we want to have, what is the purpose of statues? What is the purpose of those statues being there? Usually it's someone has come up with some money and they're looking for a way to spend it, and so they want to highlight a particular person or a particular something, and so they erect the statue. And
Right.
so we know that a lot of the uh, Confederate statues were in response to um, the civil rights movement. And so, do we want to continue erecting statues that are in or have statues in
Mm-hmm.
that are in response to something rather than um, are we edifying something? Are we highlighting something? Are we creating an environment of togetherness in our society? And I'm thinking we need to have that discussion about why we're having statues and if we should continue to use statues as a form of um, because it's not always art.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, as you said, true, but as you said, on the heritage point that you made, there are a lot of people that don't want to constantly be reminded that heritage. So whether the statue comes out, whether it stay up, you're hurting people with the heritage. It's just the heritage. Like for example, I learned about Jefferson Davis before he was president of the Confederacy. He was in the U.S. Army. He ran a regiment that protected what's become the southern border of the United States. Okay, and fought valiantly and led people. And and my thing is, okay, you help this country take territory from Mexico. But I never knew that about Jefferson Davis before. He's not somebody I wanted to go and research.
Hmm.
But this is the point of time that we can take all these people, and a lot of times a statue is put there to honor or to remember, good or bad. Now, where I think we should definitely make changes is if we got military bases named after people in the Confederacy and removing Confederate flags because we got to remember those were people that fought against the United States. See, like right now, you try to take some people from Saudi Arabia, try to name a military base after Osama bin Laden, and see what'll happen to you. Now, if we can't name one after Osama bin Laden, why are we naming military bases after these Southern people that led armed rebellion against the United States? And that's what they were doing. They were committing armed rebellion against the United States for the purpose of keeping the heritage, keeping certain people in bondage that at the time the Constitution called property. They treated African Americans like chattel. They
So
didn't treat them like human beings.
so um, I guess I'm still kind of um, dealing with the idea that we have placed such a large amount of energy into monuments and statues.
Hmm.
We've so one person or one group of people want this statue, and
Right.
another group of people says this they don't want the statue for whatever the reason is,
Hmm.
and it will come down to um, using dirty tactics or using political muscle, and rather than trying to build a consensus and
Hmm.
find compromise. So
Right.
so so a statue is one thing. Um, couldn't they people who wanted to celebrate Jefferson Davis instead of having a statue, a 40-foot statue, a 50-foot statue, maybe having a bust someplace in a Civil War museum? Why does that statue absolutely have to be there, in a public park or in some place where, um, you know, other people who don't want the statue is going to be? So there, to me, there's a larger issue of we're not willing to work with each other to find workable solutions. to.
Oh, that's true.
I mean that's true. And when you push anybody to the point of anger and rage, they're not going to be willing to talk. The people, and that's on both sides. And then you talk about leadership at the top of our country. He hasn't shown a willingness to deal with people.
Well, he's been part
The
of the
people,
problem
he's
because
been part of the problem.
he's not putting forth ideas to try to find common ground. He's usually picked a side, and all of
Yeah,
his comments go to supporting his side of the argument. And he's not a
Hmm.
mediator. He's got the prime mediation position. He has the
prime.
ability to bring us together because he can be the final authority. And rather than taking the opportunity to be the final authority, he chooses a side and he combats half of his country based on the ideologies that he's putting forth. And so then he becomes, rather than the ability to move us forward in our society, then he becomes just another chain or he just becomes another link in the chain that separates us, that pulls, that we use the tug of war of, how do we manage our society? How do we build the ability to work and live together? So I understand the frustration with him, and the difficulty I have is, anytime you bring him up into a conversation, he's going to be polarizing.
Hmm.
He
I'm not.
falls
I'm
on
not
one
even
side or the other.
frustrated. I'm not even frustrated with him. I mean, he's he's a buffoon,
Okay.
and for him to win and get what he wants, he has to keep the country divided at each other's throat. The people that's ticking me off is these conservatives that are up there in the Senate who aren't man and woman enough to say no, this is enough, and to put him on his tracks and figuratively speaking, put him on his butt.
Well, okay. So
Uh, you, it's like anything else. You bring people together, you talk, you work a compromise. Okay, so you put Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee and other Confederates in a Civil War museum, or if it's in a public square, you erect a statue of whoever in this public square. Like Robert E. Lee is credited, as I learned in history, with saving St. Louis. He was an engineer, and when the Mississippi River was flowing away from St. Louis at the time, St. Louis made his living by being a river town with all the trade and commerce that came off the river. So he put dams and dikes to keep the river flowing right at the St. Louis coast. That was worthwhile. That was a worthwhile endeavor. Uh, put up too, like the city of Birmingham, Alabama, and Lord knows during the civil rights era, Birmingham, Alabama was one of those hotbeds. Bull Connor and all of that. But the city of Birmingham gave Eddie Kendricks of the Temptations a statue in the park with the Temptations, showed the Temptations on stage performing because Eddie Kendricks was from there and he constantly kept in touch with Birmingham, Alabama during his time with the Temptations. And so I think more efforts like that are needed. And it's about, like you said, it's about reasonable people coming together and realizing we both got to give something.
and so
And let's make it for everybody.
and so so you alluded to the fact that the president's party supports him on some of the more controversial stances that he takes. But I think that is to be expected. Expecting that the Republicans are going to push back against a Republican president, while it is a reasonable expectation, it's maybe it's not reasonable. Maybe while it's an aspirational expectation,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily reasonable.
But they
Um,
did it in light circumstances. That's
but
what made Nixon
that
go
may be the
ahead and
case.
resign.
That may be the case, but um, we should expect that they're going to support their candidate because they put him up there. Just like, if you put up a candidate for in your job, you put up a candidate for a
Hmm.
promotion, you're going to fight for that candidate until you realize that that candidate is wrong for the job. Because
Well, that's not proper.
when you originally decided that person was right for the job, you put them up for
Hmm.
that, you're going to back them. That's what the Republicans are going to
Right.
do. They put the guy up for the job, and they're going to back him, and that's something that we can expect. Um,
Absolutely.
what we hope for is that when we see that person is being unreasonable or is detrimental to the system as a whole,
Hmm.
that they will value the system over the
Right.
individual. And at this point, we've determined, people who are not a part of that party, that that the president is detrimental to the system as a whole, and that we'd like for those people inside their party to see the same thing that we see, and that's
Right.
where I think is a difficulty that we're going to have with trying to get. It would be nice if the president was a uniter. If they wanted things to work out and he wanted to push ideas that both parties can agree with, but we've become so polarized, and the monument issue is just one more indication of how polarized we are. We can't
Hmm.
simply agree on how to address monuments that make half the society uncomfortable.
Right. Well, monuments are monuments, and back to the political scenario. The way I look at it is, bottom line comes to most of these politicians is their job. You talk about whether their candidate is making sense or doing the right thing. uh, that's not really the issue with a lot of them. If they don't back the party's guy, they may lose their job. And so that's the bottom line for a lot of these politicians. We can sit and look at them and say, why do they keep backing? Why are they still back? It's their job. That if
Hmm.
they get voted out of office, then where are they gonna go to get work? Who's gonna pay them? They're gonna
Yeah.
lose their mansions. Most of these politicians are millionaire status anyway, and money is the bottom line for them. So it's politics is about power and money. It's not about being right or wrong. And as far as being a uniter, I can't. Can you think of any one candidate or politician right now that could actually be considered a uniter in this political climate if they were to be in office?
Well, sure,
From
there's quite a bit. Um, just because I disagree with your politics doesn't make you divisive. It's how I talk to you that's going to more determine, am I a uniter or not. If I attack you because you're different, if I'm calling you, uh, so the president has called them radical Dems. Um, uh, some people, say, uh, because you don't agree with me, you hate America. Those aren't words
Hmm.
that unite. But
Yep.
if I say, I recognize that you have a different view than I do, and I don't try to vilify you for that different view, but I try to find common ground. That's what a uniter is. It's not it's not that you're always going to be successful. It's that you're always going to try to be successful. If
Hmm.
you if you're constantly picking a side and then fighting that battle and not trying to reach across and say, okay, I recognize you think differently than I do. How do we find common ground? That's all a uniter does. All a uniter does is say, I
Hmm.
recognize that you think differently than I do. How can we make this work together? And there are tons of politicians that are trying to do that. Yes, do they um, come out and say the other side of the aisle is not trying to work with us? A lot of times that's just a ploy to try to get people to lower their defenses and come to the table. Do I think that there's a better way to accomplish that? I do. But, you know, a lot of these guys go to lunch together, they sit and talk,
Mhm.
they're humane to each other when there's no camera. But when there's a camera on, the
Hmm.
world becomes a different place. So do I think there's uniters? Yeah. That, to answer your question, I think there's tons of them.
I wonder how much, how effective a uniter, so-called uniter, can be in this climate
So
right
called.
now. Well,
It would be interesting to
I guess
see.
well, what? Okay, let me ask you this: Was how united was the country under Obama?
So okay, so there was this political division didn't start under Obama. It started under Reagan, actually.
Okay.
Um, Reagan was a very polarizing figure, um, and some of it happened even before that. You can go all the way back to the Dixiecrats and find division. When you have a two-party system, there's polarization built into a two-party. A party system builds uh, conflict. So the question of how unified the country was under Obama, it wasn't.
Okay.
To answer your question, I guess I
So
went the scenic route.
it's the
Like the
system.
current, like the current guy that's in charge of the Senate, Mitch McConnell. He was the main one that was always talking about Obama. He recently said we paid for the sin of slavery by having Obama as president. Uh, he was the main one whenever Obama signed an executive order, had his knickers in a twist. But then they're letting Trump do all this crap because Mitch McConnell sitting on the Senate won't let the Senate do anything.
Right.
And he's just sitting there. They changed the rules so they could put two of Trump's picks on the Supreme Court. They changed the rules in voting. I mean, what I was saying was that's why I don't get so necessarily frustrated at the president. It's the Senate under Mitch McConnell's leadership. You know, uh,
So you
when
asked the
Obama,
question. I'm sorry. You done?
go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just Warren asked the question about the country being united, and I'm was thinking that maybe he would go on, he had another idea to follow that up. He just wanted some input on that.
Well, the question was just to address the issue of the division. I don't think a particular politician from either side is going to be able to bridge society at the current state of division we're at right now over certain issues.
You'll never get full united
Hmm.
because you got people that's gonna hold on to their side, extremists at both ends who gonna hold on to their side no matter what. They're not gonna give nothing. They'll take everything, and you're not gonna get those people united. But there's a whole bunch of people in the middle that come together that's reasonable, and that's how you get stuff done.
And
There's a
here,
lot, compromise has to be had. You got to do it. You got to do it with compromise. That's how things get done. You mentioned Obama. Obama had those famous beaver summits. A lot of things got done. Bill Clinton used to go play golf with the other side a lot. A lot of decisions, a lot of stuff he had done got done on the golf course. So there's ways to do it. It's just a part of are the people willing to do it? Are they willing to put in the work?
okay, we're gonna. I think we're gonna. Unless you guys have some more comments on this subject, I think we're gonna wrap this one up.
Well, I
Anything
just had a
else?
couple things.
Well, then let's go.
Yeah, I was listening to young legal guy. Well, not younger. He's probably my age actually. Guy named Jeffrey Robinson. He's department deputy legal director of the National ACLU, and he
Mhm.
was talking about the Confederacy in the U.S. and he used a couple of quotes from George Orwell's 1984, and this is a reference to the monuments. He says, "Who controls the past controls the future." That's number one. Number two was, "Who controls the present controls the past." And how I relate that to this monument thing is like, okay, these monuments from the past, from then until now, have controlled how, have influenced or represented how certain people looked at things. And now, in this present sense, people are rising up and saying, wait a minute, you got the wrong idea about history. Basically, these guys are bad guys. Why are we celebrating traitors against the country? They don't belong in our government buildings, maybe in a history museum. That would be appropriate. But for these people to be representing the image of our government is wrong. So now we're trying to control from the present back to the past so that people can see where we came from. Because a lot of the problem is people don't even understand the history. They don't have a good knowledge of the history. Oh, that was the culture. That was this and that. And the Star Spangled Banner, Francis Scott Keys was a slave owner.
Mhm.
He wrote that song about the Royal Marines. Did you hear that story about them? Do you know about the Royal Marines?
Hmm.
They were black soldiers who fought with the British against this country,
Hmm.
and they were
Mhm.
kicking some butt, and
Mhm.
he could not stand it. So at that last battle where the Old Glory, well, the flag was still flying, he wrote this song. But we have to deal with the past and the future from the truth, and I think that's the main thing here. So my feeling is this: those monuments should never be represented in government buildings like the capitals, state houses. But most of all, they're symbolic at the very most. And right now, we're in a time where black men are being executed by the police. We're still struggling to be able to vote. They're stopping all of that. I think those are things that we could probably put a little more effort into. Sure, I like to see the symbols come down where it's appropriate. I like to see conversation about them as well. But at the end of the day, you got that graphic, Leon, by any
Sure.
chance?
Let me pull that
I
up real
think
quick.
Yeah, Dr. Etienne, I
So I
took
don't know where
this.
this graphic originally came from.
Yeah, we don't know the origination of it, but this is the bottom line. We've got the old racist history in the monument, but on the other side, right next to that, we got systemic racism.
Okay,
Taking down
I'm a,
monuments is not going to fix the system at large.
so I'm
We
a
need.
I'm gonna quickly describe this for people who are only listening to the audio version, who
Sure.
um, don't, aren't going to watch the video version. So what we have is a cartoon, or a what do they call them? Political comic, comedy, comic, political comic,
Mm-hmm.
where you have a group of people that have lines to a statue of a Confederate general, and on the pedestal it says "Old Racist History." And then next to that is another group of people yelling "Ahem," pointing to a much bigger statue um, with a base that says "Systemic Racism." So I'm sorry, you were talking. I just wanted to describe that real quick.
Yeah, and that's the bigger enemy I think right now that we need to be focused on because you know those monuments have been there for decades, most of them. We've tolerated them. Now folks are finally taking them down. But is that the biggest problem right now? I think we need to think about that. We can take all those monuments down, and we still have some a long way to go.
And
Are we
and
gonna walk and get shot?
Well, when you got people in a rage and worked up like you do now, you look to do immediate action.
Yeah.
And the monuments are there. It can be done now. Where you're looking at the next voting come up in August. You're looking at November for the presidential election. And if he gets voted out, you got to wait till almost the end of January for him to be out of office for the new guy in. Uh, Not always have we in America always thought about the long game. We haven't thought about the long run. We are thinking about the short run all the time. Most of the time, we think about the short. And I just remember studying economics in college. In
mhm.
America, business, we put more of an emphasis on the present value of money. What is it now?
Mhm.
Where other countries like Japan and now China, they look at the future value. They willing to let you have some victories now in the first 2 to 5 years, but they looking at 15, 20, 25 years after that.
I
That's
heard
why
they have a
Japan,
100-year plan.
right, that's why Japan was kicking our butt in the 80s. But I
Mhm.
remember all the commercials they showed of the Japanese, a group of Japanese touring American facilities taking pictures. They went back, they studied it, and in the 80s, they came back and they were kicking our butts
Mhm.
in a lot of things, like the Chinese are doing now. Our
Yeah.
president even got his merchandise, his mattresses, his ties, his shirts being made in factories over in China. His wife has a jewelry line. Where's it made at? In
So
China.
so so the statues um, is a short term goal, but is it a necessary short term? Removing some of the statues, is that a necessary first short term goal, or can it be folded into the larger discussion about systemic racism?
If you don't follow it up with the political actions necessary,
Well, I think we have
it
do
you just tore down some statues.
right. You just tore down statues. So so so, but is that tearing down the statues going to create enough of a interest in addressing the problem? Because the statue is, like we said, a symbol. It is a symbol of something that is going on in our society, and
I think
maybe
it's
Well, think of,
and
a lot
maybe
of it.
tearing down the statues is a way to begin to address systemic racism.
well, think about it. If you were the power brokers of the country and you were one of the 4 or 5 families who control what happened, would tearing down some statues get to you? Or would losing 4 or 5 of your people in office that did what you said. And now instead of 50 people in there, you got 45 and you're looking at losing more. What would make the bigger impact?
Well, um, so tearing down the statue may be an inspiration for several thousand people who haven't voted, who haven't participated in public discourse, to believe that there's a change coming in the country. And now they get involved and they vote out those 5 people. And maybe that's what you need to get those five people voted out of office. Is you need those
Maybe,
statues to come down to get people
right.
fired up about the process.
Well, we
Now if
could
you
very
if you
well be
change 5 or 10 people, go ahead, Warren.
we could be at a good starting point for that. I agree that this could make a big difference down the line if we started doing other things as well as taking down the monuments, like voting out from the state, local level on up. You know, we focus so much on the top, but if we don't get it together at the bottom level, you know, it's not going to make that much difference.
As I've had a few office holders tell me over my years, all politics is local. It
Absolutely.
starts on your local level
Yep.
and it goes up. So it starts for those races for city council or alderman, as we say in St. Louis.
Yep.
It starts with your mayor, it starts with your state, then it goes up to your state reps, state senators, the governor, and it goes up from there.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
So you said you had 2 points, Warren. Was that both of them? Did we cover them both?
Okay. The other point was I mentioned cops killing us with that get and due to the qualified immunity, they rarely get prosecuted. The other point was mass incarceration in our legal system, which is something that really needs to be addressed. Uh, we have such a highly disproportionate number of black people in jail. Incarceration rates are a lot longer. There's a lot of things that Jeffrey Robinson was talking about, and he was addressing his contemporaries about and getting them to look at themselves as far as why these things are happening. But imagine if a lot of these black men, women we got locked up could actually come out and actually start to vote and get involved, because a lot of them are denied the right to vote once they get a felony and go to jail. So we need to work on those issues too, get those people involved.
Sure. And I think we had, planned to have discussions about those issues, going forward.
Yeah.
So uh, if we have reached a point of where we can break things off as far as the monument discussion, do we think we've covered that effectively?
I do.
Good.
I do.
I mean, we can always come back and revisit it if we find that there was something that we overlooked. And so in the course of and this one, so Warren, Warren and I think about politics totally differently. He has There are people that he listens to I would never put in my queue, and he's always sending those to me. And I get so frustrated sometimes because I, he'll send one to me and I'll tell him all of the things why I think this person is like losing their mind, and then he goes, "Oh, okay," and then he'll send me another one. So he keeps me. He does for me what I really need. I like to believe that I listen to all sides of the story, and that I take more than just my opinion into consideration when trying to understand the environment. And Warren does not allow me to rest on my laurels and think I've got it all figured out. And I want to say that I appreciate that, as frustrating as it is. Um, but so this next clip, came from one of those people that Warren sent, and so I'll go ahead and play the clip, and then I want to discuss it real quick.
And disclosure, I don't know. It was what 2? How long was that video?
2 hours and 20-something minutes.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure what you clipped, but let's roll with it.
I know, and I mentioned to them that it was my fault because normally I try to give them a heads up, and then that way they can prepare. So whatever response we get from them is totally unplanned.
All right.
So they understand there's gonna be some of that. You see, we experienced this in politics. At first, we had politicians that protected black politicians that looked after black people's interests. But over the years, they started infiltrating and sending us in political puppets.
Or people in the chat.
Yeah, but you need to hear it. Because you're going to give
So they understand there's gonna be some of that. You see, we experienced this in politics. At first, we had politicians that protected black politicians that looked after black people's interests. But over the years, they started infiltrating and sending us in political puppets. They started sending in niggas who were only concerned about swagging the hell out. Shout out. So they understand there's gonna be some of that. You see, we experienced this in politics. At first, we had politicians that protected black politicians that looked after black people's interests. But over the years, they started infiltrating and sending us in political puppets. They started sending in niggas who were only concerned about swagging the hell out.
Can't hear it.
Shout out Kwame Kilpatrick.
Can't hear it.
They sent you niggas who were sitting up here and these were the pimp preachers. Now they had a new avenue to go down. So they went into politics, did not a damn thing, allowed the race soldiers and white supremacists to run wild, didn't do anything to help the black economy whatsoever, with very, very, very few exceptions. And after that, they inundated you again. So in D.C. and Baltimore and Chicago and Atlanta, it's not lost on me that you got black females. They started infiltrating with these black females because white folk don't consider black women to be threatening. So what they did was they found some of these sorority hoes. Oh, did I say it like that? Yeah, I said it like that. So what they did was they went and they got some of these sorority hoes, like Kamala Harris. They went and got some of these sorority hoes, Keisha Bottom B in Atlanta, and sat up here and told you this will be your leadership. Why don't she look cute? Remember that bullcrap Freddie Gray got killed and niggas talking about how cute the damn mayor of Baltimore was. Wasn't he Stephanie Rollins Blake? Another bottom B of white supremacy? They sit up here and sell us on symbolism. Oh, isn't your mayor so cute? Isn't she so sexy? Wouldn't you love to hit that?
What we're going to do. We're going to crush this right now. And so my apologies that I didn't get it to you guys before so that you can comment on it. So what we'll do is we'll save it for the next show, and I'll make sure you guys get to hear the clip, and then we'll discuss it then. And,
okay.
And that way, I have. With that being said, I am going to close out. I want to thank everybody for joining this afternoon. And we look forward to having you back with us next week. That concludes this episode, and thank you for listening. This podcast is designed for live listener interaction. Visit the website, thelionsdenstl.wixsite.com/home for details about how to join the conversation. The video version of Altitude Adjustment is available on YouTube. Search for Lions Den STL. And the audio podcast is available on Stitcher.com, Anchor.fm, the iTunes Store, and the Google Play Music Store, to name a few. Look for Altitude Adjustment where you get your podcast and consider making a contribution by visiting anchor.fm/altitude-adjustment2. Remember, the internet is powered by your likes, shares, and comments. So please like, share, and comment on this and other episodes because it matters. As always, be cool, be calm, and above all, be careful. Look out for the other guy because they may not be looking out for you.